This will be a very difficult video, and most of you simply won't be able to finish watching it. But this isn't a horror movie, it's real life, so try your best. In July 2020, Virginia photographer Mark Laita got lost on his way home, and looking for help took a wrong turn. Finding himself in some unknown village, he got out of his car to ask for directions. On the porch of one of the houses, he met creatures that only distantly resembled humans. They didn't speak, they barked. Their eyes looked in different directions, and there wasn't a single tooth in their mouths. They jerked chaotically, grunted, and drooled, though they behaved peacefully overall. But at some point, this guy in the shat pants with a deformed face began actively gesturing and called the photographer to the backyard. Right behind the bushes, next to a pickup truck, construction debris, and tires, Mark saw excavated earth. And at that exact second, it clicked in his head. All this chaos was just a backdrop for something much more terrifying. Since the 19th century, the Whitaker family has lived in total isolation, actively practicing incest. Most family members immediately after birth are sent to fertilize the lawn in the backyard, while those who remained alive no longer look so much like humans. I pull up, and these people are just staring at me. And this is something that, in short, is the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. And it all started back in the 19th century when two twin brothers, Henry and John Whitaker, had children who fucked each other, and they liked it so much that the Whitakers turned it into a family tradition. And with each new generation, facial features became increasingly blurred, and eyes moved further apart. The genetically closed circle continued to spin, and by the 21st century, the Whitakers had become creatures seemingly frozen on the edge between man and beast. Before leaving, Mark raised his camera and took one last shot, which later became the most striking in his career. If the Whitakers made you feel uneasy, don't worry, that's a normal reaction. What's abnormal is what comes next. But first, let's answer the question, what exactly is the problem with fucking your kin? You see, every person has about 20,000 genes, and each gene is represented in two copies. We get one from mom, the other from dad. Sometimes one of these genes can be damaged, but if the second copy of the gene is healthy, it compensates for the problem. But if both copies of the same gene turn out to be damaged, the child will have a defect that manifests as congenital diseases. When children are born to blood relatives, for example, a brother or sister, the probability of such a coincidence increases manifold because they share many identical genes. Therefore, the likelihood increases that both parents will pass on the same damaged version, and the disease will manifest, and each subsequent generation will collect all the problems of the previous one, and so on in a circle. But there is one country where no one worries about such numbers. And what country is that? This young man named Maxim will answer us. Oh no, it's hard for Maxim to answer because he is in a lot of pain. He has a rare genetic disease, and it is slowly destroying his body. And, as you probably guessed, his parents are first cousins. He can't see worth a damn, can barely hear, can't speak normally, and also can't walk without assistance. Maxim is Pakistani, and Pakistanis have a rule. If a defective child is born, you need to keep giving birth until you get a normal one. This is literally a factory for producing disabled people. Both of his sisters are blind, deaf mutes. They only grunt. What conclusion can be drawn here? That you can't have your own kin? Perhaps, but the mother of the Pakistani family sees it differently. My children were born normal. The doctors ruined them. It is all the will of Allah. However, it is not Allah who pays for the food on her table and the roof over her head. Simple British taxpayers do. For context, the size of the benefit for such a child in the UK is £500 a month. That's 53,000 rubles, or 300,000 rubles for 6 of them per month. For some, incest is not only a tradition, but also a profitable business. Well, Pakistan is the world capital of incest. 50% of the population here fuck their relatives, and in villages, this figure reaches a crazy 80%. In Britain, a third of all newborns with genetic diseases are the children of Pakistanis. In other words, Pakistanis are the main suppliers of disabled children in the United Kingdom. Uzbeks and Tajiks are not far behind them. In Tajikistan, 80% of disabled children are born into consanguineous marriages. Look, these 3 girls' grandfather and grandmother are biological brother and sister, and their mother and father are cousins. As a result, the girls have no joints. In such a situation, you could say they were lucky to even live to be 8 years old. However, one cannot help but notice how strong a spirit can exist in such a weak body. At first, mom didn't want to bring us here, but we convinced her that we wanted to study. Now I am happy that, despite the illness, I will be educated. And here it only remains to see how their mother justifies it. I love my girls very much. Allah gave them to me like this. In general, justifying one's irresponsible actions as the will of Allah is a fairly common practice in Muslim countries, especially the poorest ones, where the biology textbook has been completely replaced by the Quran. This map highlights the leaders of inbreeding among all the countries in the world, and they are literally all, without exception, Muslim. And so we have this mutation. It gives a ton of different effects. Descendants will be born with this glitch over and over again. More Moreover, they will survive, and they will have problems. And often these will be specifically problems with intelligence. By some estimates, 50% of the total Arab population are born as a result of relative interbreeding. Interestingly, there is no data on Kazakhstan. There, this topic is as taboo as possible. But here's the rub. The highest interest index for incest porn in the CIS is specifically in Kazakhstan. Among the top, only one Russian city stands out, Grozny. On the other hand, incest is, in principle, the most popular genre of porn by a colossal margin. In 2024, on the famous Black and Orange site, incest porn gained a total of 4 billion views, more than all other porn combined, which had 3.3 billion. And this is not surprising. According to statistics, 20% of those watching this video have caught themselves thinking about sex with their mother or sister at least once in their lives. And about 4% didn't just fantasize, but actually did it. At the same time in human history, this was not always something secret and forbidden. European royal families, for example the Habsburgs, did the exact same thing for centuries, but officially, proudly, and for the good of the empire. After all, it seemed to them that if they didn't let in foreign blood, the dynasty would become stronger. But in reality, the opposite happened. The most powerful royal family in Europe turned into a bunch of people whose jaw entered the room before their head did. They held power for 650 years until Charles II of Spain was born, the last of the Habsburgs. He could not chew and constantly drooled, and also suffered from epilepsy, was mentally retarded, physically weak, hideous, and, fortunately for all of Europe, a sterile, impotent. Therefore, the dynasty ceased to exist with Charles II. We are observing roughly the same thing right now with pugs. Let's finally stop pretending that this is a normal dog. Once upon a time, this was a perfectly healthy breed with a short muzzle, but people wanted to make them cute, flat-faced, and toy-like, and they began to crossbreed pugs with close relatives. At some point, nature gave up, but man continued and got the logical result. The modern pug cannot breathe normally. Its eyes literally fall out of their sockets. It has problems with its spine, jaw, skin, and internal organs. But at least it looks unique. Yes, in humans, it can also look unique. For example, the famous Fugate family, whose heredity was formed strictly within their own circle until they had blue skin. As a result of a mutation, part of their blood hemoglobin turned into methemoglobin, a bad and blue version of it, which one generation after another turned the Fugates into Smurfs. But these people didn't understand what they were doing. However, the next heroine chose a forbidden path with her son absolutely consciously. Before You is Iceland. Everything here is so compact that before a date, people go to a special website to check if they are relatives, because the risk of unwanted family connections there is, alas, no joke. In Russia, the scale of the country is larger, of course, but dating can still be a bit difficult. Sometimes it's the same old faces, sometimes endless swipes leading nowhere. But fortunately, an app appeared that does everything differently, and that is Cover. I've already told you about it, and summer is the best time to remind you. There are two sections here, dating and poster. Unlike other services where everyone just came to swipe, when an app also suggests places for the first meeting based on your interests, that's a win. Once again, in the dating section, there are no stupid swipes. You just see all the people in your city and right to the one you actually like. But I advise filtering profiles by the necessary criteria in advance: age, interests, and everything you need. This saves a lot of time for everyone, and at the very least, it's something new. In the poster section, you can find unusual events that you can then go to together. Art, unusual food, yoga with kittens. There are hundreds of events and hundreds of thousands of people here, so you will surely find a partner or just company for the evening, as under each event, you can clearly see those who are going to it. And for the particularly sophisticated, there is an 18+ section. In short, don't stay alone. That's what doctors say. In 2010, Amy Sater, a beauty from the state of Michigan, received 30 years in prison. She had 5 children, and there was nothing unusual in the family. However, there was one more son whom she gave up the day after birth and never saw again. And 14 years later, she found him on social media, invited him to a hotel, and initiated an illicit romance. Their meetings in hotels immediately became regular and lasted for 2 years, until under the pressure of her own conscience, Amy went to the police and confessed to everything. And perhaps this is approximately the kind of story imagined by people who type taboo categories into a search engine. Well, I don't want to ruin anyone's fantasies, but the truth is that such dark realities don't look nearly so appetizing. As a rule, it's the opposite. An unwashed, wasted on substances woman and her own relative sharing a peeling, stinking mattress. And here is just such a story from Arkansas for you. Don't put away the popcorn. The series continues. While this poor fellow was telling the cop everything, their common son with pink, highlighted hair approached them. While the mother is resting after their encounter, the guys enter the house with the cop, and the pink-headed son immediately attacks the woman with his fists and is promptly packed into handcuffs. And now the spotlight, ladies and gentlemen. Before you is the charming Crystal, the forbidden apple of discord. Her hair is so unwashed that even the image conveys the smell. Her partner's son doesn't look much better. Well, here is another example where the mother was actually incredibly striking, but in the end, it was still a very bad idea. Barbara Bakelin, the face of fashion magazines and a recognized beauty of the 70s, decided that family intimacy could be used as therapy to change her son's orientation. This story began with external services for the son and ended with a deeply disturbing shared encounter. Her logic was simple. If he was with a beauty like her, his preferences would surely change. To ensure he went along with it, Barbara constantly kept her son in a clouded state of mind. A couple of years later, the boy suffered a mental breakdown and took his mother's life. Later, the boy was released, and then he attempted another tragedy with his grandmother, after which he went back behind bars, where his story came to a dark end. Why didn't the kid report it to the police? An obvious question with a non-obvious answer. Because he feels like the king of the world. He defeated his father and gained control over his mother, his actual reality. He experiences euphoria, a sense of omnipotence. It is important to clarify that this specific family dynamic is much less common than other forms of domestic abuse. The ratio is approximately 1 to 100. Moreover, every single country in the world has its own landmark case where people's minds are blown. In Russia, everyone remembers the Khachaturian case, where a father mistreated his 3 daughters and was eventually stopped by them. A completely distressing story. But truth be told, if you want real grit, it always makes sense to mention the Austrians, who have long been beyond competition. April 27, 2008, a quiet Austrian street, ordinary houses, trimmed lawns. It's hard to believe that right here, in the basement of this ordinary house, for 24 years, a nightmare was happening that made the whole world freeze. This is the house of the Fritzl family, Joseph, his wife, and 7 children. The 4th daughter, Elizabeth. In 1984, she suddenly disappears. The father said then that she had joined a sect and ran away from home, and everyone believed it, and no one could imagine what darkness was hidden by the door leading to the basement. One day, the father asked Elizabeth to help carry things to the basement. Downstairs, he incapacitated her and bound her in the dark. From that moment, a nightmare lasting a quarter of a century began. Elizabeth spent the first 4 years in total isolation, except for those moments when her father came down to subject her to his will. Time after time, day after day, thousands of instances of absolute cruelty, sometimes occurring multiple times a day. In a moldy, rotten underground chamber, she would bring 7 children into that world, all fathered by the man who kept her prisoner. Elizabeth taught the children math and literacy, while simple things like a forest and grass were something like science fiction to them. But in 2008, Joseph made a mistake. When one of the children fell seriously ill, Joseph took her to the hospital. But the doctors suspected something and demanded the mother's presence. Then the old man brought Elizabeth out of the darkness so she could accompany her daughter and not arouse suspicion. This was the day when the gray-haired, 42-year-old Elizabeth saw daylight for the first time in 24 years. In the hospital, she told everything. Joseph was arrested. The basement was opened, and the whole world saw how far a person could go. Now Joseph is 90. He looks like a retired villain, gray-haired, shriveled, with empty eyes, seemingly a stereotypical monster. However, research says that most often, behind forbidden family relations are not maniacs with an axe, but quiet, respectable men, fathers with a kind smile, and exemplary family men. And this is exactly where the greatest horror lies. It's not just in the news, but nearby, behind the wall, or in a quiet cottage with a perfect lawn. On March 19, 2009, an Austrian court handed Fritzl a life sentence. And it's quite interesting that even if the relative had been an adult and consented, he would still have faced prison. Those are the laws there. Intimate relations between direct relatives are strictly forbidden. However, the laws regarding same-sex family relations differ in some regions because there is no risk of genetic consequences. What about other places? In some countries, such as Russia, China, or France, consensual relations between adult relatives are not a separate criminal offense, but it is not allowed everywhere. In Germany, you can get up to 2 years, and in Norway or Britain, up to 3 years. In the USA, it's a total contradiction. In New Jersey, it is not prohibited between consenting adults, but in Texas, you can get up to 20 years for such family violations, and in Wisconsin, as much as 40, just like for a serious crime. In other places, the punishment for violating these family boundaries is even harsher. In Luxembourg or Taiwan, it's up to 10 years, and in Australia, as much as 25 years. And here is the main paradox. Throughout the Middle East, in Pakistan or Iran, the punishment for these acts is the most severe possible, especially if it involves same-sex relations, which is seen as a major violation of religious law. Yet this doesn't help. They still have the highest rates on the planet. Overall, the point is obvious. The more problems a country endures with these kinds of tragedies, the stricter the laws and the higher the responsibility. Literally everyone watching this video right now will say that such relations are disgusting. Well, who then watched taboo content 4 billion times on just one site? Well, let's pretend as if all this was done by one very obsessed person with a very fast internet connection. I hope he's watching this video. Dude, specifically for you, I will now answer the most important question. Why does the forbidden actually attract people so much? In fact, there are many reasons, and the main one is the taboo itself. Any prohibition acts like an adrenaline drug. It's like stealing a piece of candy, only the effect is infinitely stronger, and the brain simply loves playing with fire. Only in real life, instead of a high, there are basements, tragic conditions, and prison. Another reason is power. Fritzl didn't just abuse Elizabeth, he treated her like an object. He sought a high from the sense of absolute power over a relative. And this motive, to one degree or another, motivated almost all the stories we considered. And the last part of the blame can safely be shifted to media influence. Famous fantasy series are packed with romanticized versions of forbidden dynamics. Millions of people watched as siblings in Game of Thrones behaved as if they were in the most romantic love story ever. Some dynasties even turned this into their family brand. The audience knew the truth, yet still watched and participated in the hype. It was these scenes that became the highest rated moments of the most popular series in human history. Well, we've walked through hell, from the Whitakers to the dark basements of Europe, from places where this is a tragic tradition to the isolation of the modern world. And all these are not just stories. It is a thirst for power that leads to madness. It is the allure of the forbidden, and it is a stain that remains forever. I don't know about you, but in the end, I will draw two important conclusions for myself. First, genetics is not just a chapter in a school biology textbook. It is an inexorable judge that will always deliver a harsh and just verdict. And the second conclusion, in any such situation, the best choice is to stop before it's too late. Thank you for surviving this video. I really ask you to subscribe. I really want 1 million subscribers, and I'm really trying hard. Also, be sure to watch my next video about serial killers. It will be right here. And bye, everyone.